Good evening, everyone, and how has your week been? Yeah, well, that's lovely. Twitch is already telling me my connection is unstable. Not nearly as unstable as a person trying to stream. To the point that I forgot to turn on my camera. What the hell? Computer, now is not the time to freeze. Okay, now my model's on. So again, how has everyone's week been? I forgot to turn the light on the cat bed. Of course, I don't think the cat's been using it lately anyway. I may switch it to my outdoor camera to see... well, so you guys can watch these on my porch, I guess, but... I don't think anyone's out there either. Oh well. But, welcome back to the bookstore. If you haven't heard me yelling and shouting it from the mountaintops lately, book 3 is out. I have not added it in my message rotation yet. I may just make one rotating book notion. Well, one rotating book, one just goes to the entire set. There's a Dodrio in chat, if anyone wants a double-headed bird. Excuse me. But we're going to be doing more of Rivals of Sherlock Holmes tonight. And it's going to be more stories from the Baroness Orczy. She had some interesting stories. It's going to be more skin of my tooth. So I'll be doing that voice a lot tonight. I always like having this chatting time to start with. It does make me wonder about Twitch saying my connection's unstable. I know I'm supposed to have thunderstorms tonight, but that hasn't completely killed one of my streams before. Let's see, which one do I have my... timer's on stream all once, I believe. Why is it using 98 of my CPU? Go ahead and go through and get things shut off so it'll hopefully cooperate a little bit better. Yeah, all my browsers are freezing. It's almost, well, about 4 minutes before I typically start doing stories. What is my... Okay. I'd forgotten I'd put Task Manager as one of the things it shows. So. Yeah, it's got my CPU running at 100. I have no idea why. But yeah. Let's go and get over to the study before I completely lose my mind. But yeah. Oh, okay, well, now Twitch says my connection is excellent. That's a good thing. I didn't even do the audio checks for the alerts or anything. But again, congrats on first, Guilty. Thank you for lurking, Kiva. I'm gonna turn off the cat cam. Why is my... Okay, I can see my chat on OBS, but I can't see my chat on the actual browser window. Okay, I'm going to turn off the cat cam because it's not doing any good. And we will get into the stories. Let's see, how many stories do we have left in this book? Hydrate? I suppose I can do that. Thank you for the hydrate, Guilty. Let's see how many stories are left in this book. 4, 5, 6. There are only 7 stories left in this book. That's crazy. Because I really don't know what I'm reading after this one. Do I stick to mysteries, or do I change the topic of Thursdays at all? Because it used to be Thursdays there we'll do folklore. Specifically folklore as opposed to fairy tales on Fridays. If you have any suggestions, by all means, drop me a line, whisper, a tweet. If you got my Discord, leave a message there. If I knew what the hell I was doing, I would set up my own Discord server. I've got one. I was using it exclusively for PNG work when I started, and I just never bothered releasing it. But anyway, our first story for tonight, Skin of My Tooth, his memoirs by his confidential clerk, compiled and edited by the Baroness Orczy. Number 3, The Case of Major Gibson. I have always wondered why Skin of My Tooth was so unpopular with his own profession. He had very few friends among his colleagues, but those he had were okay. He had very few friends among his colleagues, but those he had were certainly very staunch. I've heard it said that his ways were unprofessional. Certain it is that he avoided actual litigation for his clients whenever that was possible. I suppose that would be called unprofessional. Personally, I have never met a man of such varying moods. Over the Swanborough murder case, he was alert, uncanny, and irritatingly active. Over Major Gibson's case, he always looked as if he was going to sleep, and as if any trashy French novel were more interesting than the honor of his client. Now, I remember when Major Gibson first called upon him and told him his story, I thought to myself, here's the prettiest kettle of fish that ever Skin of My Tooth had placed before him. He was a good-looking man, this Major Gibson, but the day he called at the office, he looked as white as a ghost. He began by saying that unless Mr. Mulligan would help him, he had made all arrangements for committing suicide. I could see that he did not quite know how to begin. Skin of My Tooth did not evidently come up to the imaginary portrait of gallant Major's imagination had drawn for himself. I must say that my esteemed chief looked particularly fat, pink, and inane in the morning. I always like to hear the story from the beginning, he said, as he quietly, without asking his client's leave, lighted a huge German long-stemmed pipe. For a moment I thought that the Major was going to make an ass of himself and leave the room and go and commit suicide, sooner than tell his tale to the ill-mannered Irish lawyer. But he was a tight hole, and he kept his temper. About a month ago, he began at last very abruptly, I was staying at the Belcher Hall in Miss Everard's place in Rutlandshire. This was a good deal of gambling going on there in the evenings. I am not a rich man. I disapprove, on principle, of playing games of hazard. Nevertheless, I played and lost one night. "Dates, please, whenever possible," interrupted Skin of My Tooth quietly. "October 18th, 1901, said Major Gibson, whilst I, knowing what would be expected to me presently, made a rapid shorthand notes, as my imperfect training would allow. At 11 o'clock p.m., I last left the baccarat table at Belcher Hall, with my last possible cheque on my current account drawn to bearer, and promissory notes amounting to close on £8,000 in the hands of various gentlemen, my fellow guests in the hospital mansion of Belcher Hall. I must say that the Everard was exceedingly nice to me later on in the billiard-room, when he had a smoke and a drink together. I was a fool and mistook his kind words for genuine sympathy. I admitted to him that I had lost a great deal more than I could possibly afford, and that there was nothing for it but I must exchange into some Indian regiment and put off my proposed marriage until I had in some measure retrieved my heavy losses, or if the lady were unwilling to wait, to give her back her word and her liberty. I think Edward must have understood how hard this would become to me. Only a month ago I had become engaged to his wife's niece, Miss Marian Sutcliffe, to whom I was passionately attached. I am not a young man, and I did not fall in and out of love as quickly as some of my contemporaries. He broke off abruptly. Evidently his subject of Miss Marian was still a sore one. "How long did the interview last? With Edward, I mean," asked Skin of My Teeth quietly. "At 12 o'clock precisely I left him, intending to go to bed, but I knew that I should find it very difficult to get to sleep. I strolled into the library, a beautiful room on the ground floor, with deep mullioned windows. I meant to get a book and then to retire to my room. I remember that the room was quite dark when I went in, and as the heavy curtains had been drawn closely across the deep window recesses. As I did not know where or how to switch on the electric light, I went up to one of the windows, meaning to draw the curtains aside and let a flood of moonlight into the room. But the garden looked so fine and poetic, and I felt so moody and wretched that, quite contrary to my usual habits, I sat down in one of the deep window seats and stared out, mooning, thinking of nothing in particular, into the garden before me. How long I remained there, I cannot tell you. Certain it is that suddenly I became aware that someone was in the library besides myself. I had not heard the door open or shut, and I did not know who the someone was. I only inferred that it was a lady, for I could hear the rustle of a silk gown against the parquet floor as she and her turn went up to one of the windows. Major Gibson paused for a moment there, giving me time for the space of 30 seconds to at least stretch out my cramped muscles. Skin of My Tooth had not said a word. He was looking down at the meerschaum bowl with a long-stemmed pipe, whilst a coy and gentle smile played round the fat corners of his mouth. Major Gibson passed his hand over his forehead once or twice. I know that he was cursing himself for the fool he had been at 1 a.m. in the memorable night of October 18th, 1901. "I can assure you," he said at last, "that nothing in particular crossed my mind when I heard the rustle of that silk dress, and certainly the next moment I should have made my presence known to the midnight wanderer. But just then I happened to have my head turned towards the garden, and to have caught sight of the figure of the man cautiously making his way towards the library windows. I was keeping, as much as possible, within the shadow of the trees. A second later I heard a gentle whistle. The window furthest from the one in which I was sitting opened, then shut, and I realized the most discreet and prudent thing I could now do was to keep as quiet as possible. I possibly could for the present, if I were undetected later on, to feign a deep and uninterrupted sleep." "Discreet and prudent," commented Skin of My Tooth with a smile. "It is strange how we all differ in the meaning of those two words." "I am wise, too, now after the event," retorted Major Gibson with a little impatiently. "At the time I did not think I was doing the slightest harm either to myself or to the two who were having this clandestine meeting in this extraordinary hour. Remember, the room was quite dark. The man, whoever he was, had evidently slipped through the window, and no one had drawn the curtains. I heard some hurried whispers, then the man spoke impatiently. 'Have you brought them anyway?' What the lady replied I could not hear, but it was evidently satisfactory, for he said quite loudly, 'That's all right, let's have a look.' I remember it struck me at the time that the midnight intruder did not seem particularly tender. It came very soon and to an end. Curiosity was supposed to be a feminine vice, but I can assure you that at that moment I was positively devoured with curiosity as to who the lady was who could thus risk the whole edifice of her social position for the sake of some individual who was evidently unscrupulous and obviously was none too tender. I heard again the rustle of the dress. The lady was returning to her own room, leaving the man to find his way out alone. I put one finger on the curtain, hoping to catch a glimpse of her, but I only saw the shimmer of the green silk train as a ray of moonlight caught it. Then she glided out of the room. I remembered all the ladies who were staying in the house. I had seen them in the drawing room before the miserable baccarat party. I remembered, too, that Mrs. Everard, our beautiful hostess, who was very fair, wore a magnificent green satin gown. I also remembered that Marion, my Marion, Miss Everard's niece, had looked bewitching in a clinging green frock with a long train. Of course, Marion was out of the question. You will understand that, won't you? The very thought was preposterous. But Miss Everard, my friend's wife, young and pretty, I assure you my head was in a whirl. I had not moved. I had forgotten the man until a flood of brilliant light startled me from my dream. I attempted to push aside the curtains, and immediately beneath one of the electric light brackets, which had evidently just been switched on, a man was standing with his back to me. He was examining intently something which he held in his hand. My instinct was to knock him down then and there, like the foul thief he is. But I suppose I must have made a noise when I crossed the room, for he turned before I could reach him. Then I saw what he held in his hand. It was a necklace of pearls and diamonds which I had before now seen around Mrs. Everard's neck. I don't really think, continued Major Gibson after another little pause, that I can tell you exactly what happened after that. All I can remember is that I had him on the floor, and that I would have killed him if he had not at least reluctantly given back the necklace. I did not strike you that it might be the best thing to ring for the servants, to give him the charge like a thief he was. I skin in my tooth after a while, during which he was contemplating the unfortunate Major through his half-closed lids. I thought of it for a moment, but you did not do it. No. Why? Because he swore to make a scandal if I denounced him. I had not seen the woman, and I was not sure. But there on the floor, close to the door, was a bunch of pink roses which I had given to Marion a few hours ago. I see, said Skin on my Tooth with a smile. There was a silence in the room for a moment, whilst I had a chance of cracking my knuckles, which were horribly stiff and cramped. I think I can guess what happened after that, said Skin on my Tooth, at last talking the pipe out of his mouth. The Major did not reply, and he went on. You sent the thief about his business, and you yourself were discovered 5 minutes later in that necklace in your hand, unable or unwilling to give an account as to how you had come across it. Major Gibson nodded. Met Everard just outside the library. He caught sight of the necklace in my hand, even before he had recovered from his surprise of finding me there at that hour. He asked me for an explanation. I could give him none. That is to say, I gave him one as near as the truth I dared, which he, of course, disbelieved. I gave him back the necklace, and he told me what hour I could get back in the train to town. He was supposed to be a friend of mine, but he thought me guilty. You see, he knew how heavily I had lost at cards. I had myself told him that I was sorely pressed for money, and might have to break off my engagement, and even leave for India. You tell me that explanation you did give to Mr. Everard, interrupted Skin of my Tooth quietly. I told him that I was going to the library late at night to fetch a book, and I had found a man there with Miss Everard's necklace in his hand. That I succeeded in getting the necklace from him, but that he, in his turn, succeeded in getting away through the window. He naturally asked you why you did not raise an alarm. He did. And also whether you would recognize the supposed thief if you saw him again. Quite so. Your replies not being very lucid, he drew his own conclusions. But forgive my interrupting you. You have not quite finished, I think. I haven't much more to tell you. It appears that the ladies went up to their rooms soon after 12, the men staying down in the billiard room to smoke. But at last everyone retired, and Everard himself was about to do the same when his wife, fully dressed still, met him on the stairs, with the news that one of her most valuable necklaces had been stolen. She was putting away the jewels which she had just been wearing, when she noticed that one of the cases was empty. Everett persuaded her to go back to her room, and he himself started on the tour of inspection of the house.
And he met you.
And he met me, as you say.
Then that is all you have to tell me.
That is all. Everard was up in time to see me before I left in the morning. He and Lord Cumber, the colonel of my regiment, both tried to persuade me to confess, and promised as an inducement that I would be made a clean breast of it all, and agreed to exchange in some native regiment and to break off my engagement with Miss Sutcliffe. The whole matter should be hushed up.
And you promised?
I promised nothing.
The result being?
That the scandal was gone around in town. I've been requested to hand in my papers, and in my clubs it has been strongly hinted to me that I should be turned out unless I succeeded in clearing my character.
And so far you have not attempted to mention the lady's name.
Would I not be branded as a worse blackguard than before for slandering a woman in order to try to save my own skin? And I was not sure, remember. I did not know who the lady was.
Have you any conviction now?
The Major hesitated a moment, and then he quietly said, "No." Part 2. There was a silence in the room for a long time after that. The Major was starting moodily into the fire, and Skin of My Tooth was puffing away at his old German pipe, smiling gently to himself. Presently he began to hum a tune, and he looked so coy and fat and comfortable. No wonder he jarred the unfortunate Major's nerves. "Well, sir," said the latter to the very last irritably. Skin of My Tooth smothered a yawn.
I was waiting.
For what?
To hear what you are going to do.
Here the Major swore vigorously. "Do you think I should be here now," he said, "if I knew? The few friends I have got left to advise a slander action, and I have come to consult you, as someone who has told me that you are the ablest man in London in cases of this sort."
That someone, no doubt, said you had a jolly bad case and required the unscrupulous devil like Patrick Mulligan to pull you through, remarked Skin of My Tooth dryly. I could see from the deep red of the Major's bronzed cheek that my esteemed employer had guessed right. Skin of My Tooth settled himself within the depths of his large, shabby leather armchair. He smothered another yawn with an attempt at politeness. He looked, in fact, as if he were getting very tired of the whole thing and longed to get back to his favorite French novel, the yellow paper cover of which was even now protruding from one of his pockets of his ill-fitting coat. "A slander action in this case would be a very trickish matter," he said at last. "Mr. Everett, against whom I suppose you would enter it, would plead justification, and you must own that the circumstances of the case are decidedly in his favor. He finds you a very ambiguous person, and the explanations you give are terribly lame. You might get damages 1 farthing, which would do you no more harm than good, and effectively kill the last shreds of reputation you have got left. But there is one thing, of course, which you can put you right, and that is a confession from the lady." "Impossible." "Why?"
"Is it likely?"
"I think so. You have come to me for advice. It is the only one I can give. Some of my more eminent colleagues would no doubt suggest an action, but these same eminent gentlemen will tell you that Patrick Mulligan has no reputation to mar. His ways are tortuous, his means unscrupulous. Perhaps they are right, and you are willing to adopt these ways and means as follow my advice unreservedly. You will scrape through this hole by the skin of your teeth, I tell you, and I will pledge the evil reputation I have got that we'll obtain a confession from this unknown lady."
"It would have to be a public one now, I am afraid, to do me any good."
"It will be sufficient. I give you my... No, I won't give you my word. It wouldn't do much good to you. But ask the most disreputable character in the London slums when Skin of My Tooth has said, 'I'll do it,' whether he is a man to break his word." No wonder the Major looked a new man. I've seen many a poor chap look like that when once they have had a square talk with skin in my tooth. By gosh, but he knows how to carry conviction with him. When he talks to a client or to the jury, it's all the same. They run after him like a pack of sheep. And now, my dear Major, he concluded, which day will be convenient for you to meet Mr. Everard? Meet Everard? Guessed the Major. I wouldn't care to, sir, said Skin of My Tooth with his gentle smile. Just now I used the word unreservedly. I will not move on this matter unless I profess your entire confidence. The Major hesitated no longer. Skin of My Tooth was his last straw. You do what you think best, he said doggedly, but Everard will refuse. Wednesday next, shall we say, at 3 p.m. That will suit you? Muggins, make a note of that. Everard will refuse, repeated the Major. I think not, said Skin of My Tooth with a smile. I have your permission to proceed. As you will. And you place yourself unreservedly in my hands. For one brief second the Major hesitated, while his quick, sharp, clear, honest eyes scanned quickly the fat, unwieldy figure huddled up in an armchair, the sleepy eyes with their drooping lids, the ill-fitting, shiny black coat, and that yellow-backed French novel protruding from his pocket. Skin of My Tooth sat there, and the coy smile of his playing round the corners of his mouth. Then the Major, with a sudden frank gesture, put out his hand and said firmly, without reserve, Muggins, show the Major out, said my chief with sudden, obvious alacrity. When I came back, having shown the Major downstairs, I found Skin of My Tooth absorbed in his French novel. I waited for a while, then, as he did speak, I asked at last, What am I to do now, sir? Nothing, my boy, nothing, he said airily. Confine yourself to not being an ass for the rest of the afternoon. That will always be something accomplished. In the meantime, you can hand me down Burke's Landed Gentry from that shelf. I gave him the book he wanted. Then he added, By the way, Muggins, copy out of your notes on a sheet of parchment and gross them neatly. We may require them in that form later on. Welcome in, Mossy. Congrats on getting second. Part 3. Mr. Everard, strange to say, was willing enough to meet Major Gibson and his solicitor, and talk of the matter over amicably if possible. I fancy he's a decent enough sort of man, and was only too ready to see the end of this unfortunate business. Moreover, I don't suppose that he, either, cared to take the chances of defending a slander action. If by any chance Major Gibson succeeded in making his case good, he would get such a thundering damages that even Mr. Everard, rich as he would not care to pay. It was finally arranged that Mr. Gibson, accompanied by Mr. Patrick Mulligan and myself, should be at the Everard's house in Park Lane on Wednesday at 3:30. Of course, Mr. Everard's solicitor would also be present, also Lord Comerbury, and by special request of Major Gibson, as represented by Mr. Mullins, Mr. Everard and Miss Marion Sutcliffe. I had not the least idea, of course, that what Skin of My Tooth was up to, but the whole of that morning, while he was reading his French novel... Hold on. Oh, that is so confusing. What Skin of My Tooth was up to, but that whole of that morning, while he was reading his French novel, I saw him smile to himself that funny, coy, and gentle smile which always meant mischief to his adversaries. I remember feeling that in the interview, like a character of the French play, everyone wore a frock coat except myself. Skin of my tooth was very shabby and fitted him badly, and from one of the pockets a yellow-backed book protruded very conspicuously. We were shown to a fine dining room, oak-paneled, magnificently furnished. There was a large fire in the big open grate, and the two ladies, when we came in, I did not know which was Mrs. Everard and which was Miss Sutcliffe, were sitting close beside it. Skin my Tooth put down his hat and drew from his pocket the notes I had made, and carefully copied out the engrossed one of Major Gibson's case. This he placed in a little side table which stood close to the mantelpiece, and then all the gentlemen sat down around the large dining table, and the fun began. Skin of my Tooth started talking very quietly, I wondering all the time what he was driving at, and how he hoped to benefit the unfortunate Major by his extraordinary comedy. But he went on talking, and I must confess that...
Hey, Cinder. Welcome in. How's everyone doing this evening? See, I think when I was in there with Matthew Reggie, you were reading The Lion and the Cat from Brentford book. Ah, cool. So I haven't gotten to Brown and Lilac yet. Feel free if you need to do after stream care, get everything taken care of, or hang out and lurk around. I always like having lurkers. Hey, thank you for the follow. Sip on some Kel, what are you on? And thank you for the follow, Kobo. Yeah. And I guess I'll hydrate. Okay. Kel bases her introductions on names. So we had Captain and Cider, so she said, okay. Frosty Toadspot does some interesting introductions. Hey! Thank you for the follow, Jackalope. And welcome in. Get comfy. Do any extra stream care you need to. Let's see, where is it? Skin my Tooth started talking very quietly, and I wondered all the time what he was driving at and how he hoped to benefit the unfortunate Major by this extraordinary comedy. But he went on talking, and I must confess that never in my life had I heard such a fine string of lies so magnificently uttered. "I must thank you, ladies and gentlemen," he said, "for so kindly accepting my client's request. You felt, as I do, as you will, I'm sure, that nothing could be more deplorable than the dragging of this unfortunate affair before the public. Major Gibson has been quite involuntarily, I feel confident, and still grossly maligned. I will ask you, gentlemen, not to interrupt me just now. You have your fling at us later on. For the present, you must allow me to state positively that Major Gibson is not only absolutely innocent of the ugly charge of theft proffered against him, but is even now the victim of a code of honor as chivalrous as it is misdirected." Skin-on-my-tooth then, with perfect suavity, started a highly colored account of the incidents in the library at Belcher Hall, as related to him by Major Gibson. The moonlit garden, the dark room, the rustle of the silk skirt, the clandestine meeting. Of the half-dozen people there present, every one of them, except myself, did their best to try not to stop him and sneer at him. Ejaculations muttered in a whisper broke out on every side. The ladies looked indescribably shocked and withering contemptuous, but Mr. Everard looked ready to knock Skin-on-my-tooth down, and his legal adviser talked of extraordinary allegations and of slander, and of thumping damages. But Skin-on-my-tooth sailed serenely on. When the interruptions became too loud, he shouted louder, and that was all. "Now, gentlemen," he said, "when you have quite done calling me a liar, I can get on all right. I don't blame you. I don't even mind telling you that I called Mr. Gibson a liar myself when I heard him tell his tale. You see, he keeps telling me that he had no proof, no witnesses to corroborate what he said. Now I am not one for believing that there is ever a truth without any proof. And when my client left me, I said to myself there must be some proof, some witness somewhere. Major Gibson did not recognize the lady. Good. But in that large house and grounds of Belcher Hall, full to overflowing with visitors and servants, someone, I cared not who, must have seen the unknown woman with the green gown, or that man. Some trace somewhere would have been left in her passage or his, some sign, some indication, whether traced by a man or by fate." Gradually, as he spoke, I noticed that the attitude of his hearers became considerably modified. There were no interruptions now, no whispered comments. Mr. Everard and the legal gentleman hung upon my chief's words. The Major himself looked as if he suddenly had a bright visa of hope, and had been opened before him. As for the ladies, one looked pale and breathless, while the other, leaned back in her chair, kept up the air of a dignified hauteur which some English ladies know how to wear when certain matters which they deem objectionable are discussed before them. In fact, when Skin-on-my-tooth paused for a moment and began fumbling in his pockets as if to search for something, this same haughty lady said quietly,
do you think, Archibald, that in view of the matters which, Mr. Mulligan sees fit to discuss here, I and my niece had better go?
I beg 1,000 pardons, said Skin of my Tooth vainly. I have finished, and I assure you, please do not go. The matter will interest you both. Have I your permission to proceed? Many thanks. It is not necessary. I think for me to dwell here upon the ways and means I employed on the behalf of my clients. You may imagine that I left no stone unturned. I was literally gasping, I can tell you. I'm a pretty good liar at my occasions. I would not enjoy Skin of my Tooth's confidence if I were not. But I had to humbly confess to myself that in the face of Skin of my Tooth's last assertion with regard to the stones, which, to my certain knowledge, were made of paper and were all yellow-backed, and I was the only bungling botcher. But what I could not make out was what all his fumbling in his coat pockets meant. I thought that he was looking for the notes, which I had written out so neatly, and which he placed on the little side table close to the mantelpiece. Not a bit of it. When I made a movement to get them, he looked at me, and understood that I had better sit still and wait. I am quite sure, continued Skin of my Tooth, after a little dramatic pause, during which I noticed that his whole bulky figure seemed as if it were a couch ready for a spring, that you will understand what a glorious day it was for me and my client, Major Gibson, when at last my strenuous efforts were crowned with success. No, ladies and gentlemen, I am not mistaken. That the dense populated, magnificent mansion that I unearthed the man who, on that memorable night, was present near enough to the library of Belcher Hall to see the mysterious lady in the green gown give Miss Everard's necklace to the unknown thief. This man saw the whole scene from beginning to end. Reasons which I will explain to you presently, but which seemed paramount to him, forced him to silence until I compelled him to speak. He saw and would know again the man who, like a thief in the night, bullied and robbed the woman who was a fool enough to ruin her reputation for his sake. He heard the whispered conversation, saw the necklace pass from her hand to his. He recognized the mysterious lady in the green gown, and picked up, after she left, something which had belonged to her, which he holds still. Skin of my Tooth was surpassing himself. All of us felt as if the electricity filled the air. I am sure that I was shaking with excitement from head to foot. Both Major Gibson and Mr. Everard were as pale as death, and I thought one of the ladies was about to faint. The other, whom I now knew was Miss Everard, had risen from her chair. She was now standing close to the little side table, almost immediately behind Skin of my Tooth, who suddenly, dropping his voice and lolling placidly in his chair, with a gentle smile and perfect matter-of-fact tones. Unfortunately, misfortune has dodged my steps, and rather those of the poor client. The witness I had so carefully unearthed died a couple of days ago, most unexpectedly. I wondered if I had been mistaken, but I certainly thought that I heard a very obvious sigh of relief from somewhere. Certain it was that spell of excitement under which we had lain was broken, and one or two ironical comments came at the end from the table where Miss Everard sat with his legal adviser. But I knew that Skin of my Tooth had something up his sleeve. I knew that smile of his. However, before the man died, I had succeeded in persuading him to swear to an affidavit stating all that he had seen. This affidavit I had brought here with me today, and then I knew what he was driving at all along. He was on the alert, and so was I. In the midst of his neatly told lie, he stopped and pointed towards my notes, which were lying on the side table close to the chimney. "Give me that affidavit, Muggins, my boy." But before I could reach them, before anyone had realized what she was doing, Miss Everard, as quick as lightning, seized the notes and thrown them in the fire, while she turned to Skin of my Tooth and said defiantly, "At any rate, the woman's name will now remain a secret forever." Then I understood. I cared nothing about the burning of my fingers, but I did not want to rescue the remaining fragments of my notes, because I knew they would be wanted. Miss Everard was glaring at old Skin of my Tooth as if she were a hungry tigress. If looks could kill, my esteemed employer would have been a dead man then.
As it was, he smiled placidly, and taking the fragments of the half-burnt paper from me, he quietly smoothed them out and placed them on the table before Mr. Everard. Then he once more turned towards the angry lady. "My dear lady," he said very gently, "I feel that I have behaved towards you absolutely like the cad my eminent colleague here presents no doubt will call me. Just at this moment I know that you hate me for an odious comedy I have devised out of order to extort an unwilling confession from you. Yes, my dear lady, a comedy and a confession. I don't think that I am the only man here present who knows that the Honorable Thornby Oaksman, your brother, is a grave thorn in the distinguished family's flesh. That with somewhat impulsive thoughtlessness you tried to be the material assistant of him at the time that he was actually flying from the police, and unbeknown to your husband is only natural. That in trying to shield him from your own family honor, you allowed an innocent man to suffer so severely, it only under the same circumstances most of your sex would have done. Let me in my turn confess to you, and to Mr. Everard, to whom I must also offer my humblest apologies, that the only witness present on that fateful night was Major Gibson himself. That affidavit which you hoped to destroy consisted of my clerk's notes on the facts taken under my unfortunate client's dictation. There is no woman's name mentioned throughout the few pages, but I think you will admit yourself that in trying to burn the documents, you identify yourself by your dainty hand. I've plainly written your own. It is wonderful with what dignity Skin on My Tooth can speak when he likes. Mr. Everard looked as if he had some difficulty in standing straight. He did not look at his wife. She did not attempt to speak. What would be the outcome of the extraordinary scene I could not conjecture. Evidently Skin on My Tooth was satisfied, for without another word he borrowed from everyone, and with Major Gibson left the room, followed by my humble self. As I passed out the door, I gave a final look around at the actors whom we had left on the stage. Mr. Everard had gone up to his wife, who had fallen sobbing into a chair. Miss Sutcliffe was kneeling beside her, trying to comfort her. Lord Cumberbury and the solicitor looked as if they wished themselves safely away. I must say Mr. Everard behaved very well in the matter. Both he and Lord Cumberbury made it their business to see that no shadow of stained reputation remained on Major Gibson's reputation, though Miss Everard's name has, of course, never been mentioned. It all happened more than a year and a half ago, and everyone has, of course, heard of Colonel Gibson's gallant defense of Ellen's Drift with a handful of men. He was married to Miss Sutcliffe about a month ago, and Mr. and Mrs. Everard gave a magnificent reception at their fine house in Park Lane in honor of the bride and the bridegroom. I suppose there was supper served in the room in which we had sat on that day. Skin on My Tooth was not asked to the wedding or reception. He would not have gone, however. Okay. These stories are long, but ads are about to come up. So if everyone will hang around, when the break is over, we'll get on to the second story. Again, Cider, thank you for the raid, and I'll see you all again in a few.
Doesn't look like any beasts have shown up on the cat cam. Oh well. I don't have the light turned on for it anyway. I don't even have a cat in the room with me. That's crazy. I'll come back. So these stories are out of the book shown, The Rivals of Sherlock Holmes 2, which is a collection of stories from magazines of the same era that the Sherlock Holmes stories were coming out. These are out of the Windsor magazine, and claiming to be only edited by Baroness Orczy. The Skin of My Tooth, his memoirs of his confidential clerk. And we are now moving on to the fourth story of the set. So, feel free to settle back, and we'll continue. Skin of My Tooth, his memoirs by his confidential clerk, compiled and edited by the Baroness Orczy. 4. The Duffield Peerage Case. It was through the merest coincidence that Skin of My Tooth got mixed up with this remarkable case, which brought him suddenly into such great prominence before the public, and was really the foundation stone for his subsequent, more fortunate career. In those days, it seems very long ago now, money was often very tight in the Finsbury Square office. It was spent as soon as it was earned, for Skin of My Tooth never learnt its value. Principally, I think, because he never exerted himself to earn it. The gentle art of self-advertisement was totally unknown to him, and even in its most elementary stages, and had I not made friends with the sub-editor of the Surrey Post, and had got him an insert that excellent puff beginning, Patrick Mullins, the most eminent and learned lawyer on criminal cases, is now in our midst, etc., etc. No doubt the Duffield case would have drifted into other far less competent hands, and heaven only knows what the upshot of it would have been then. We had gone down to Guildford in connection with the Windmill Will case, and finding the sweet little Surrey town particularly attractive, Skin of My Tooth had decided to stay on for a few days, and under pretense that he would feel lonely, he insisted on my remaining with him. We had spent a week of delightful idleness, and my chief had devoured a large supply of his favorite French novels, when the murder of Mr. Sybil Thursby, a noted solicitor of the Guildford, threw the whole town into a veritable state of uproar. From the very first, the wildest rumors were circulating on the subject of the Sprong tragedy, and it became really difficult to sift the real facts from the innumerable surmises and embellishments indulged in the imaginative reporter of the Surrey Post. The truth, however, as far as I ultimately succeeded in gathering it for the benefit of my chief, who seemed interested in this case, was briefly this. Mr. Sybil Thursby had an office where he transacted his business in the Guildford High Street, but he lived in a tiny house just outside the town, on the Dorking Road, his household consisting of himself and a man and his wife named Upjohn, who shared the duties of cook, gardener, maid, and man-of-all-work between them. On Friday last, the Upjohns went upstairs to bed as usual at 9:30 o'clock, leaving their master at work in his study on the ground floor. This room had windows opening out into a little garden in the back, and also a little conservatory leading to it. Mr. Thursby always bolted the windows and locked the conservatory the last thing before going to bed.
The Upjohns heard someone knocking at the front door some 10 minutes after they went upstairs. But both having already gone to bed, they seemed to have been too lazy to get up. Whether Mr. Thursby himself let the belated visitor in or out, they could not say, for they heard nothing, and very soon were both sleeping the sleep of the just. But next morning, when Mrs. Upjohn went into the study, she was horrified to find her master lying on his side across the threshold of the conservatory door. His clothes, the clothes he was wearing the night before, were covered in blood, and his face was obviously that of the dead. Upjohn, summoned by his wife's screams, quickly ran to Guildford for a doctor and the police. The former pronounced life to be extinct. Mr. Thornbury's throat having been cut from ear to ear, obviously with a short curved blade found in the conservatory. There had been no time even for the short struggle for his life on the part of the unfortunate solicitor. According to the theory immediately formed by the police, he had been attacked with extraordinary suddenness and fury, practically at the very moment when he was opening the conservatory door to let the assassin in. The latter must have once gripped his victim by the throat, smothered his screams, only to use the knife when the poor man was already senseless. In falling backwards, Mr. Thursby had seized the portiere curtain and dragged it down with him in his fall. Otherwise nothing was disturbed in the room. The windows were found carefully bolted. The lamp even had been extinguished. Few little articles of silver and bits of valuable china in the cabinets were left untouched. The unfortunate man's watch and chain, the loose cash in his pocket, were found intact, and to police the crime seemed as purposeless as it was mysterious. At the inquest, which was held on the following Tuesday, the verdict of willful murder against some person or persons unknown was returned, and the public had perforce to rest satisfied that everything was being done to throw light upon this tragic and awful affair. But gradually, her humor, and more persistent and positive, and less vague in others, began to find general credence. The Surrey Post had brought the news that a lady, a stranger to Guildford, had gone to the police to request the return of certain papers which had been in the charge of Mr. Sherlock Thursby, and for him she held a receipt signed by him. The rumor went on to assert that the search was made for the papers, and that they had not been found, but that one of the constables, when he was carefully surveying a room where Thursby was murdered, had discovered a handful of ashes of burned papers in the grate. 24 hours later, the news had spread throughout England like wildfire that the lady whose papers were so unaccountably disappeared claimed to be the lawful wife of the Earl of Duffield, and that those papers were of paramount importance to the legal aspect of her claim and that of her son. Skin of My Tooth had stayed on at Guildford all these days, chiefly because the case interested him from the very first. With his unerring instinct of criminal matters, he had scented a mysterious complication long before the many rumors anent the lady claimant had taken a definite shape. "I imagine Lord Duffield won't enjoy this washing of all his family linen in public, which seems to be quite inevitable," he said to me one morning, when he had read the Surrey Post. We had just finished the excellent breakfast provided by the Crown Hotel, and Skin of My Tooth had suggested an advisability of my running up to town and get him a batch of French novels, when one of the waiters came to our table with a great air of importance and mystery, and holding a card upon a silver tray. "His lordship is in his carriage," he murmured with a respect befitting the important event, "and desires to have a few minutes' interview with Mr. Mulligan." I glanced at the card, which bore the name, the Earl of Duffield, while Skin of My Tooth quietly intimated to the waiter that he would see the lordship in the sitting-room. Lord Duffield was a stout, forward, jovial-looking man of about 50, decidedly military and precise in his dress and general bearing, but at the present moment obviously laboring under a strong emotion which he was making vigorous efforts to conceal. "Mr. Mulligan, I believe," he said. "That is my name," replied Skin of My Tooth. To what can I ascribe the honor of the visit? I read your name in the local papers, Mr. Milligan, but of course I had also heard of you before in connection with criminal cases. The persistence, but he added, looking somewhat dubiously at my humble personality. This gentleman? My confidential clerk, Lord Duffield. You need have no fear of speaking before him. Satisfied on that point, Lord Duffield sat down, and then he spoke abruptly. This is about the murder of Sybil Thursby. The turn of his affairs has taken forces me to place the matter, as far as I am concerned, into the hands of a lawyer. Our own family solicitor is too old and has never had any experience of the sort, whereas you... I am entirely at your disposal. To make the matter clear to you, I shall have to take you back some 30 years when I, a young subaltern in the line regiment quartered at Simla, had no prospects of ever inheriting his title or property. When I was barely 20, I fell in love, like a young fool I was, with a noted beauty Simla, the Miss Patricia O'Rourke, whose reputation already at that time was none too enviable. After a brief courtship, I married her, in the very teeth of strenuous opposition on the part of all my friends, and less than 6 months after my marriage, I had undoubtable proofs that Miss O'Rourke was a more evil character than even Simla had suspected, for at the time she was married to me, had a husband living still, a man named Henry Mitchell, as great a blackguard as I believe has ever trod the earth. Half crazy with grief and the humiliation of it, I at last succeeded in obtaining a sick leave, and soon sailed for England, determined, if possible, to turn my back forever on the woman who has blighted my life, and on the scene of my folly and my shame. Well, Mr. Mulligan, I dare say that experience has taught you that grief at 20 is soon forgotten. Within a year of that saddest period of my life, my uncle, the late Earl of Duffield, lost his only son, and I became his heir. He obtained from me an exchange into the Coldstream Guards, and soon after that I married Miss Angela Hutton, the daughter of America's great Copper King. The following year my uncle died, and I inherited title and property, and then my own son Oswald was born, and I became a widower. In the meantime, Miss O'Rourke or Miss Mitchell had disappeared from Simla. No one knew where she had gone to. Some of my friends thought that she was dead. I was obliged to tell you this, Mr. Mulligan, resumed Lord Duffield after a slight pause, so that you may better understand my position at the present moment. Remember that I have been, during all these years, under the firm impression that my marriage to Patricia O'Rourke was an illegal one, and that our son, born of the union, was not legitimate. I had what considered an ample proof that Henry Mitchell was alive at the time that she married me. When I taxed her with the crime of bigamy, she not only did not deny it, but calmly told me to go my way if I liked. Now, after 30 years, she has once more appeared on the arena of my life. Not only that, but she has come forward with a strong claim for herself and her son. She has obtained affidavits sworn to by people of impeccable position, testifying to the death of Henry Mitchell in Tehran, where she had settled down in business 3 clear days before her marriage to me. After 30 years, commented Skin-O-My-Tooth in the astonishment. She went to see Sybil Thursby, who, as you know, perhaps, was the most noted lawyer in Guildford. He was a very old and intimate friend of mine. She put all the facts before him and showered him with all her papers. He came and told me himself that the affidavits were perfectly in regale, duly signed and witnessed by the British consul in Tehran. One had been sworn by Dr. Smollett, the leading English medical man who attended on Henry Mitchell in his last days of illness. But why 30 years? Well, it appears that she had all along been morally convinced that Henry Mitchell had died before our marriage, but she had lost trace of him for some months and had been unable to obtain the necessary proofs to convince me of his death. However, when I left her, She resolutely set to work to obtain those proofs, but by the time she'd succeeded, some years had elapsed, she had also lost sight of me. She did not know that Lieutenant Adrian Peyton had become the Earl of Duffield, you see, and mere accident revealed this fact to her, and immediately realizing her duty to her son, then set sail for England. Mr. Thursby, I understand, is a lawyer as well as thought the lady's claim? He thought that there could be no two opinions on the subject. There usually are, in law, though, said Skin-O-My-Tooth with a smile. Yes, and you may be sure that I did not mean to allow my son Oswald to lose his rights and become nameless without a struggle, but Sybil Thursby had shown me the affidavits which my wife, I suppose I must call her that, had given in his charge, and I am bound to confess still that her case seemed remarkably clear. Still, I meant to fight to the bitter end, and then, and now? Now? Have you forgotten that happened? Sybil Thursby has been murdered, and those papers have been stolen or destroyed. According to you, by whom? Asked Skin-O-My-Tooth quietly. Heaven only knows. Look at me, Mr. Mulligan. I am capable of such a crime, and yet the public opinion has already bent to verifiable scaffolding from those insinuations against me and my son Oswald. My wife has gathered round her a veritable army of partisans. The London papers utter scarcely veiled accusations, and the people of this country cut me in the street. But what about your son, Viscount Storyteller, I mean? What about him, Mr. Mulligan? I tell you that there's an infamous conspiracy against him. He went out on the afternoon preceding Sybil Thursby's death to pay a visit to some friends about 20 miles the other side of Guildford. He was on his bicycle and rode home late in the evening. Just outside Guildford, his tire punctured badly, and he was still 5 miles from Duffield, so he elected to have the puncture mended in the town sooner than walk his bike home. He left his bicycle at Raleigh in the High Street. Then he thought he would kill time by having a chat with Sybil Thursby. Went on to the cottage. It was then a little before 10. He knocked at the front door, and receiving no answer, he went away again and went for a stroll in the lanes until his machine was mended. He called for it at Raleigh's at 10:15. It was ready then, and he rode home. Yes, and while he stood at the moment irresolute upon Sybil Thursby's doorstep, a couple of workmen saw him and have informed the police of this fact. If you have read the local paper this morning, Mr. Mulligan, you would have noticed that they announced sensational developments in the Guildford mystery. Then sensation will be, I take it, that my son Oswald will be accused of having murdered Sybil Thursby in order to destroy the papers which would have robbed him of his inheritance. Of which crime you assert that he is innocent. Pray do not understand me. Mine at present is an open mind. I've only followed the case very superficially. Since you have honored me with your confidence, I will, of course, go very fully into the matter. Your position from a legal point of view is secure for the moment. Failing the proofs that Henry Mitchell was dead at the time of your marriage with Miss Patricia O'Rourke, your proofs that he only died after the marriage hold good and make your proposition unsayable. In that way, the murder of Mr. Sybil Thursby has certainly done you, or rather your son, a good turn, for the lady may perhaps never succeed in getting her proofs together again. Teheran is such a long way off, and the credible English witnesses are probably dead or disposed by now. But of course, there is public opinion, and no doubt you yourself cannot estimate at the present moment how far it will force you your hand. Lord Duffield groaned. At present, he said, I only care about the dangers of my son Oswald. Quite so, and if you will allow me, I will now at once see the detective inspector in charge of the case. You may rest assured that everything that can be done will be done to throw daylight upon these unfortunate events. Lord Duffield seemed as if he would like to prolong the interview. He looked to me as if he had something in his mind which he could not bring himself to tell, even to his lawyer. Skin-O-My-Tooth, with his keen insight, also noted the struggle. I'm sure, for He waited silently for a moment or two. However, after a brief pause, Lord Duffield rose, shook hands with my chief, nodded to me, and with a few parting instructions, he finally left the room. Part 2. I don't suppose that Lord Duffield realized how very strong public opinion was already against him in this matter. The lady, small blame to her, had made it her business to let the whole town know the full history of her case, and I must say that, as it stood now, it did not redound to the credit of the noble lord and his son. The detective inspector, on whom Skin of My Tooth called that same afternoon, was quite convinced that Lord Duffield and his son had planned and executed the destruction of the documents. The murder, he admitted, might not have been intended, but merely committed as a fact of self-defense when the noble thieves had found their friend awake and alert, instead of in bed as they had supposed. There is no doubt that Viscount Dottridge was seen loitering around the cottage at about 10 o'clock at night. The Upjohns were firm in their statement that they had heard a noise at the front door at about that time. The theory of the police was that the young man had gone round to the garden and tried the conservatory door. Mr. Thursby, hearing a noise, had gone to see what the noise was, and probably gripped by the throat before he could utter a scream. Personally, Mr. Morgan, I have very little doubt that his lordship in this game somehow, concluded the detective at the end of our interview with him, but I think you will agree with me that the position is remarkably difficult. What in the world am I to do? Duty is duty, and there must be no one law for the rich and another for the poor. The matter can't be hushed up now. Lady Duffield, I suppose she is that, really won't allow the matter to rest. As long as she remains in the public, she will keep public opinion well stirred up. I wish she could be persuaded to leave the matter alone now. Even if they succeeded in proving a charge of murder against Viscount Dottridge, it won't give her son any better chance to make good on his claim, will it, sir? Certainly not, replied Skin of My Tooth. You have to put the matter in a nutshell. As you say, it would be far better if the lady vacated the place and left you a free hand to hush up the scandal or not, according to the discretion of your chiefs. It was clear from the interview that the detective inspector did not know how to act. Torn between his respect for the title and position of Earl of Duffield and his own sense of duty in view of many proofs in favor of Viscount Dottridge's guilt, he was certainly inclined to wait, at any rate until the public opinion literally forced his hand in the chief's. But in the meanwhile, Skin of My Tooth had announced to me his intention of seeing the lady who seemed to be the real center of the many tragic events of the past few days. We walked around to Duffield Arms, where we understood that she was staying, and 2 minutes later we were shown into a private sitting room which she occupied at the hotel. I must say that I looked with some interest at the woman round whom such exciting events seemed to have been gathered. Though she may have been nearly 50 years of age, certainly, there was even now a wonderful amount of fascination about her entire personality, the power of magic in her blue eyes. Her son, whom she introduced to us as Viscount Dottridge, was with her when she came into the room, and it was quite impossible not to be struck immediately by the distinct resemblance which he bore to his father. Legally or not, this young man was undoubtedly the son of Earl of Duffield. Nature had taken special care to prove that fact, at any rate, and my sympathies immediately went out to him and to his beautiful mother, for there was no doubt that luck had treated them very roughly. She received my chief very graciously, and bidding him to be seated, she listened with a smile to what I may term presently of his confidentials. I am Lord Duffield's legal adviser in this matter, he said, but I think I may safely say that I am the friend of both parties. Whilst I serve my clients to the best of my ability, I have every desire, believe me, to be of service to you and to your son. She shrugged her shoulders. I have been a fool, Mr. Mulligan, she said. I ought never to have parted with those papers. Now I fear no one can help me. Surely you're wrong. There is no reason why the lost papers should not be replaced. It certainly may take some years and money, she interrupted preemptively, which I have not got. Those who murdered Mr. Thursby and stole the papers knew what they were about. They have left me absolutely helpless, and even if the perpetrator of the dastardly outrage was punished to the full rigor of the law, I should still see my son ousted from his rights.
Would you mind telling me the exact contents of the papers you considered most valuable to the furtherance of your case?
I thought she looked at him a little suspiciously, but evidently reassured by his genial smile. She said, "There were two sworn statements made, one by Dr. Smollett, who was a very well-known doctor in Tehran, the other by an English nurse named Dawson. Both these persons were with Henry Mitchell at the time of his death, and remembered all the circumstances connected with it. Dr. Smollett is now dead. As for the nurse, I've lost sight of her for 10 years. It's very doubtful that I should ever trace her."
But surely these statements were made before the resident British Council at Tehran.
Oh, yes, of course they were. Sir William Corteen was counsel at the time. He subsequently became governor of the Gold Coast and died, if you remember, some 3 years ago.
Fate has indeed dealt harshly with you, murmured Skin of My Tooth with general sympathy.
To tell you the truth, it never struck me at first that Lord Duffield would contest my just rights. When I understood that Mr. Thursby was a personal friend of my husband's, I left my papers in his hands, thinking that no doubt he would show them to Lord Duffield, who, feeling unimpeachable justice of my claim, would resign himself to the inevitable and give willingly to my son and his what, after all, is his due.
That being a very unlikely contingency now, Lady Duffield, might I ask you what you intend to do?
Failing my rights, Mr. Morgan, which I suppose from now you say that will never be granted to me, I can always fall back on that barren enjoyments. Revenge. Yes, revenge, she added with sudden vehemence. You deprive me of my position and leave my son nameless. I tell you, Mr. Morgan, that in heaven's help I will so rouse the public feeling against him that when his son has been hanged for the murder of Sybil Thursby, he in turn will have to flee this country as a pariah and an outcast, for no honest man henceforth will shake him by the hand.
She had spoken with so much vindictive fury that I felt a cold shiver creeping down my back. Skin of My Tooth, smiling blandly, was obliviously smitten by the fire of her magnificent blue eyes. "I will," he said. "You will consider your severe mandate?"
"Never."
"Surely if my client realized that you had only certain undoubtedly claim upon him, I would only speak without prejudice. But you have a son, and revenge, though sweet, might not prove very useful in his career."
"I never looked upon it in that light,"
she said coldly, and rising from her chair as if she wished to end the interview. "You would not care to name a figure," suggested Skin of My Tooth, insinuatingly, "without prejudice." For the time during the interview she turned to her son and seemed to consult him with a look, but he shook his head very energetically.
"Not now,"
she said to Skin of My Tooth, and then, with a charming smile, she intimated that she wished the interview to cease. "You will, in any case, always find me at your service," concluded my chief blandly, as we finally took our leave. Part 3. As the days wore on, and the mystery around the Guildford tragedy seemed to deepen more and more, I had another interview with Lord Duffield, at which his son, the only son he would acknowledge, was present, and I must say that seeing these two men typically of the English country-bred but high-born gentlemen, it was almost impossible to conceive that they would lend their hand to a dastardly murder of an old friend. Skin of My Tooth had received overtures on the past of the claimant, who seemed to have finally realized that revenge was but sorry pleasure, expressed themselves ready to accept a monetary compromise in return for their permanent residence out of England. To my immense astonishment, Lord Duffield fell in readily with this arrangement, which, after all, was nothing but a bribe, and the first idea gave me the purpose that he and his son had something of a conscience.
It was quite certain that the constrained feelings seemed to exist between father and son. Undoubtedly, I often caught Lord Dottage casting furtive glances at his father, and once or twice Lord Duffield looked long and searchingly at his son, then sighed and turned his head away. I don't pretend to any deep insight to human nature, but it certainly struck me that these two men had begun almost to suspect one another, and no wonder. Who else but they had any interest in destroying the papers which would have made good the cause of the claimants? And I had seen the detective inspector that morning, and knew that the police, forced into my public opinion, egged on by claimants, and convinced that they held sufficient proofs, had at last decided to apply for a warrant for the arrest of Viscount Dottage. That same afternoon, Skin of My Tooth at last obtained leave to go over to the cottage. The police, who always resented outside interference in such matters, had so far, on some pretext or another, always refused permission. But my chief was on his mettle. Lord Duffield had promised him £10,000 if he succeeded in elucidating the mystery and in averting the disgrace which threatened him and his son. Today, at last, Skin of My Truth was able not only to make a vigorous effort towards obtaining that substantial reward, but also to indulge his passions in ferreting out the mysteries which lurk around a crime. I don't think I ever remember seeing his weird faculties more fully in evidence than over the elucidation of the Guildford tragedy, that faculty which literally made him feel the criminal even before he had any clue to his guilt. The late Mr. Sybil Thursby had been buried the day after the inquest, but in his house everything had been left just as it was the night of the appalling tragedy. The Upfields had gone, refusing to sleep another night in the place where so terrible a murder had been committed, and we let ourselves in by the front door. Our footsteps echoed weirdly through the deserted house. We were accompanied by two constables, who, however, took but little interest in Skin of My Tooth's wild ramblings through the tiny garden, the conservatory, and the study. It seemed as if he expected the ground to give him the final key of the mystery, of which he already had studied the lock. He was walking along with his eyes glued to the floor, his hands buried in his capacious pockets of his ill-fitting coat, and every now and then I could hear himself muttering to himself, "There must be a bit, only a bit, there always is." Then at last he seemed to have found what he wanted, for he darted forward in a and that too. Then at last he seemed to have found what he wanted, for he darted forward towards a long, large palm, all dead, which was now dry from want of water, which stood in an ornamental pot close to the grate. Inside the pot, he discovered with dust and mud, there glimmered a piece of paper. Skin of My Tooth seized it as if it had been the most precious piece of jewelry. Then furtively he thrust it into his pockets, and signed to me to hold my tongue, as the constables had just come into the room. After this short episode, Skin of My Tooth expressed himself satisfied with all he had seen, and together we returned to the hotel. Once alone in the privacy of our sitting room, he took the dirty pieces of treasure from his pocket and carefully knocked the dust off of it, and then spread it out smoothly before him on the table. "You mayn't think it, Muggins," he said, "but this piece of dirty paper is worth an earldom, and a good deal many other things besides, including the life of a man, who, without this wee scrap, would probably have ended on the gallows. It is also worth £10,000 to me." I eagerly looked over his shoulder, and the scrap of paper was about the size of a hand, and obviously had been torn off another larger sheet. The words I could decipher were, "Harry Mitchell, 22nd, 1871, in my presence." And lower down was the evident signature, written was in a different hand. Lord Dawson. "And what of it, sir?" I asked. "What an ass you are, Muggins!" he said impatiently. "Can't you see that this is all that is left of one of the affidavits proved that Henry Mitchell died on January 22nd, 1871, or 3 days before Adrian Peyton married Patricia O'Rourke? The signature is that of the nurse, Dawson, who swore this particular affidavit." "It's no use in this state, is it, sir?" "Oh, yes, Muggins. The affidavit is always useful, even in this condition. You look out a train for me." Early tomorrow morning, I'm going to go up to town with this scrap of paper. He would not tell me anything more, and the next morning we went up to town and stayed away all day. I saw the detective inspector in the afternoon, who told me that the warrant for the arrest for Lord Doddridge was actually out, but that he had had a wire in the morning from Scotland Yard to await further instructions. I fancy, he said with a grin, that Mulligan has not deserved his nickname in this time. He can't get Lord Doddridge out of his hole, not even by the skin of his teeth. In the evening, however, Skin of My Tooth came home, dead tired and triumphant. I met him at the station, and together we immediately proceeded to the police station. "I've been waiting to see you, Mr. Mulligan," said the inspector. "We cannot delay any longer, and tonight we must execute the warrant against Lord Doddridge." "You can throw that warrant into the fire, Inspector," replied Skin of My Tooth quietly, "and tomorrow you can apply for another. You'll have to be pretty quick, too, as I fancy your game smells a rat already, and may yet slip through your fingers." "What do you mean?" "Only this. When you kindly allowed me to view the scene of the interesting murder case you had on hand, it was my good fortune to come across this interesting document." Skin of My Tooth once more carefully unfolded the dirty scrap of paper on which he had set much store. "What in the world is this?" asked the inspector. "That is a very question put to me under the same circumstances by my clerk, Mr. Alexander Sostanius Mullins." "This paper, Inspector, is all that is left of one of the more affidavits which were to prove the legality of certain claims made by a charming lady and her son. You will notice the signature, Dawson. I may tell you that the lady in question had lost her sight since 10 years ago, and Dawson, who attended upon her husband in his last illness. The same illness occurred 30 years ago. We have no official knowledge as to when the affidavit was filled, beyond the fact that it was more than 10 years ago. But if you will examine very carefully the paper on which it is written, you will notice a remarkably interesting fact." Skin of My Tooth held up the dirty scrap of paper against the lamp, allowing the light to show through visibly. In the extreme corner, a watermark, C & Sons, became very visible. "Looking through the list of English papermakers," continued the thief, quietly pointing with his thick finger, "I came across the name Clitheroe & Sons, of 29 Tooley Avenue. This afternoon I managed to confirm that the manager who informed me that the lettering of the watermark in this particular bit of paper indicated that it was manufactured in Clitheroe & Sons in 1899. "I don't understand," inspected the inspector. "What all of this?" He bit the dirty paper, and then at the unwieldy, bulky figure of Skin of My Tooth as he quietly revealed the key to the mystery which had so long puzzled the astute detective. "It is very simple," he said, with one of his bland smiles. "Personally, I had suspected all along, from the moment that I first saw Lord Duffield and his son, and realized that they, if I may express it, not the brains to carry out so daring a crime successfully. Had that been very admirable, but otherwise brilliant young man committed the murder, believe me, he would have left plenty of evidence of his guilt. The fact that you yourself, in spite of your acumen, had been unable to really bring the crime home to him, showed me that a cleverer head than his, and a subtler mind, had been at work. But until you favored me with permission to view the cottage, I had not a single indication on which to work. When I first saw the lady, I realized that hers might not have been the head, but instinct told me that her son's was the hand. But there seemed to be such a lack of motive, the whole theory seemed so topsy-turvy, that I hesitated even to follow it up. And then you courteously allowed me to view the scene on which the crime itself was committed. And once that fact struck me very forcibly, that whoever had come for that fateful night to steal the affidavit knew where to lay his hand on him. Nothing in the room or the desk had been disturbed, and yet obviously the murderer would turn down the lamp as low as possible immediately his nefarious deed was done, lest the light from the window should reveal his presence. Then, again, you know, no doubt as well as I do, how seldom it is that the murderer does not leave a single trace or clue behind him. That the most fortunate in the case of justice, otherwise many crimes would remain unpunished. I reckoned in this instance that a man, after committing what I presuppose would be his first crime, would necessarily have his nerves very much on the jar. His hand presumably would shake, and in tearing up the papers by the very much subdued light of his lamp, and in the presence of his victim lying dead on the floor, it is impossible, I say, that some scrap should not have escaped his trembling hands. You know how paper flutters, the logy itself momentary out of sight, ready to reappear as a damning witness against him. The inspector was silent. I could see that there was hanging breathless upon Skin of my Tooth's lips. And I, too, saw it all now before me, even before the chief gave us his final explanation of the unanswerable logic. In ascertaining the fact that this paper was manufactured 2 years ago, whilst pursuing had been reported and signed more than 10 years previously, it became clear to me that the affidavits setting forth Miss Patricia O'Rourke's alias, Mrs. Henry Mitchell's claim, were a pack of forgeries. From this conclusion to the understanding from her clever plan, but was a quick mental problem. After all, it was simple enough. Having forged the documents, she entrusted them to Sybil Thursby. Then her son chose his opportunity, the best he could find, steal and destroy them. After that, she hoped to rouse public indignation against Lord Duffield by openly accusing him of the theft that he would either throw up the sponge altogether and recognize her rights, or at worst pay her a handsome compensation to clear out of the country and to leave him alone. Remember, she all but succeeded. You yourself suggested the alternative as the simplest solution for the difficulty, and Lord Duffield was quite ready to fall in by these views.
But as it is, suggested Inspector Lest, do you think we shall be able to bring the crime home with these people? They seem to have been very clever.
You could bring the accusation of forgery and fraud undoubtedly home to her. You might succeed in proving the murder against her son, but I don't think that you will have a chance of doing either.
Why not?
I think you will find your birds have flown already.
That would be tantamount to an acknowledgment of guilt, and then we could overtake them wherever they may have fled.
It certainly is an acknowledgment of guilt, as you say, concluded Skin of my Tooth, rising from his chair and stretching his great loose limbs. But personally, I do not think you will overtake them if they have succeeded in making good their escape.
Skin of my Tooth prophecy proved to be correct. The detective inspector, I think, has remained convinced to this day that my esteemed employer was not altogether innocent in the matter of the escape of Mr. Hitchin and her son from the clutches of the law. They had left for London that very evening, and thence had gone to Dover, and where all trace of them had ostensibly vanished. I believe that their lucky escape from justice cost Lord Duffield a pretty penny, but of course he felt that enough family dirty linen had been washed in public, and he was willing to pay a good sum to save even more an illegitimate son from the gallows. Okay. Well, that is 2 more of Baroness Orczy's stories. I hope you all enjoyed them. Despite my stammering. Again, thank you, Cider, for the raid. And we haven't gotten quite close enough for the ads yet, so maybe we can get out before they hit. And we do have someone else reading wonderful mysteries. Edgar Allan Poe mysteries, to be exact. So let's raid into them, shall we? I do have raid messages for people to use if you wish. I've got a raid for followers. red message for subscribers. I do have it so that it is not expensive to be able to use the emotes if you want. If I can type the name properly. Oop. Oops, I can do this. Begin. Thank you all for coming in. Thank you for the raid. I'm glad you all came in. And I hope you have a good night too. But we're going to go raid Harp Griffin, who is reading Murder of the Rue Morgue. So I will hopefully see some of you back tomorrow night for fairy tales. Because that's when I do fairy tales. And see you then.